decades in the United States wrapped out since 1986. And for those who are close enough to see, on the bottom ticker are the fatalities, the injuries, the property damages, and the number of incidences. The fatalities, of course, don't take into account the environmental illnesses that follow exposure to petrochemicals in the environment. And there are many maps online that illustrate this. I think we're all organized. We'll share slides and names after, and if you're interested in sharing this with classes and with other folks. So the Dakota Access Pipeline was initially slotted designed to run here. Gotta give up. North of Bismarck, across the Missouri River, north of Bismarck. But knowing the almost inevitable situation of oil spills, it suddenly was redesigned. You can see it required a pretty significant loop-de-loop to come around south to cut across right north of the Standing Rock Reservation. And at this site, if there is an oil spill in the Missouri River, it would take 6 minutes for that oil to irrevocably seep into the entire reservation's water supply. They have a 50-year-old water treatment plant, and there is no time for emergency reaction due to the outdated facilities. So, within Lakota prophecy is there's a prophecy about a black snake crossing the land, right? So this situation, the redirection of the pipeline, without proper consultation of the tribal government, is a clear violation of treaties. But often hard to understand the geography. So a group of students, I want to thank Cynthia for pulling this together. We had been searching for good maps online. It's very hard to find this, and as you know, this issue hasn't been covered in the mainstream media. So we've been trying to put together a better map so that people can quickly grasp the history of this region and the issues at stake. So if you'll permit me five minutes, I want to talk a little bit about the prior history of dispossession and the relationship of Standing Rock with the U.S. Army and the Army Corps of Engineers that's responsible for deciding whether or not and how this pipeline would continue to cross the Missouri River. Okay. So, starting in 1851, this is the first negotiated Fort Laramie Treaty of a variety of combined tribes in the West, of an area in which white settlement was not to occur. But almost as soon as that occurred, the annuities and the support in exchange for the land that was ceded outside of this area, treaty violations began. Annuities were not paid. This was a period during the Civil War, and or stolen by traders when sent through middlemen, leading to a conflict in which eventually the U.S. Army took more than 1,000 Dakota people captive and sentencing over 300 to execution. Lincoln reviewed the cases personally and gave the go-ahead for a mass hanging of 38 Dakota men, the largest single mass execution in history. So if we go back to the map we tried to illustrate here, where the Dakota 38 were hung in relationship to the territory. Soon thereafter, General Sully, and an important date, we'll come back to the September 3rd date because it became very significant and resonated with folks on the ground. General Sully attacked a village, killing more than 300 men, women, and children, entirely peaceful and innocent people. It is known as the Whitestone Massacre. In the conclusion of these conflicts, a second treaty was signed, the Second Fort Laramie Treaty in 1968, which gives clear rights to the Standing Rock Sioux, undisturbed use and occupation of a permanent homeland. Here we can see that treaty, right? But soon, gold, General Custer of historical fame, in violation of this 1868 treaty, moved in to explore gold in the Black Hills, leading to a rush of settlers, and in 1877, as part of federal Indian policy, began to assign 168 parcels by force to Native Americans who prior had had their land in common, by, in this case, refusing to pay rations and essentially starving people into accepting the allotment process. So by 1890, just through the process of allotment and loss of land one by one, a kind of land-grabbing process, over half the original Great Sioux Reservation was lost. In 1889, right before South Dakota had statehood, the Great Sioux Reservation was divided into 4 separate reservations and that we know today, right? Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Standing Rock, and Cheyenne River. As people began to rebuild their lives, then in the mid-20th century, in 1948, the Army Corps of Engineers planned the largest public works project of a series of dams along the Missouri to irrigate settler white land, and in this process ignored the need for irrigation of Indian land, and in fact actively prevented it. So starting in 1848, plans were laid for dams in the Standing Rock area. Construction began a decade later in 1958, flooding 90% of the timberland of the reservation, the best rangelands and irrigated gardens and orchards. To add insult to injury, they were explicitly denied the right to use the reservoir shoreline for hunting, fishing, and grazing per terms of the treaty. And petitions for irrigation, development of Indian lands to reestablish livelihoods were perpetually denied. When construction began in 1958, in the dead of winter, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers evicted families for no good reason, because construction didn't begin later, and relocated them. So it's important to understand this history, to understand the really dramatic poverty and dispossession on the reservation. As the chairman, David Archambault II, said, when you look at our situation, we didn't do it to ourselves, he says. The tribe, it was the injustices, the infringements of our rights that took place over and over. So when plans came through and it became known that this pipeline was going to come through and threaten the water supplies of the community, given this history, given that there are living members in the tribe whose grandparents survived the Whitestone Massacre and lived to tell their grandchildren through oral history about it, it explains the passion and the fervor and the dramatic organization of the people against the pipeline. So I'm just going to briefly give, if y'all would like, a chronology of events since the summer, and moving along pretty quickly and changing every day, just give highlights. So the Sacred Stone Camp was established on this allotment land of one of the tribal historians' lands, LaDonna Graveful, where the original camp is, and I'm going to let the students talk about kind of the geography of how the camps have changed over time. Over the summer, the Army Corps of Engineers approved the fast-track permit. Standing Rock Reservation, in association with Earth Justice, filed for an injunction to stop the passing of the pipeline over the river, as protesters began blocking pipeline construction sites by mid-August. On September 3rd, on the anniversary of the Whitestone Massacre, the company, in anticipation that they were likely going to lose the court ruling, deliberately, proactively, viciously bulldozed a 2-mile pathway through what are sacred burial grounds for the Lakota Dakota peoples of the reservation. On that same day, when I think this hit the consciousness of many people on social media, private security forces of the company attacked peaceful protesters with tear gas and with dogs. It seems out of something from Bartolo de las Casas woodblocks from the destruction of the Indies. 5 days later, the governor of North Dakota sent out the North Dakota National Guard, and the next day the injunction was denied. But the Obama administration immediately asked Energy Transfer Partners, the company responsible for building the pipeline, to halt construction until further assessment, to voluntarily halt construction. Soon thereafter, the tribal chairman appeared at the United Nations with a petition, and now the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples has responded in kind. So there is international attention on this issue. October 9th, the district court turned down the appeal for an injunction, but again the Obama administration asked for a voluntary ceasing. But the company has proceeded and indeed accelerated construction. Civil disobedience picked up. Actress Shailene Woodley streamed her arrest. A group of senators led by Bernie Sanders have raised the issue soon thereafter. There were more arrests. The county police tried to raise riot charges against Amy Goodman, the journalist of Democracy Now!, who filmed the attack on protesters on September 3rd, accusing her of rioting. The charges were eventually dropped against her, but there have continued to be aggressive charges pressed against a variety of journalists. On October 22nd, more than 200 protesters were pepper sprayed and attacked, and there was a shift in cameras under the leads of the students. Celebrities visited, but the day after they left, there were more attacks on protesters. At this point, though, it's interesting. 2 police departments have refused to redeploy to the area. We know what happened last week with the election of Trump. I think a lot of things are up in the air. Construction continues unabated and is scheduled to finish in 2 weeks. But I believe that there was an announcement today by the Army Corps of Engineers to halt the last piece for now. Just a halt. That is not completely ready in the pipeline. Right. And the rest of the pipeline is constructed. So we're talking about this last segment in which the protesters are keeping the pipeline from being finished. Protesters have been strip searched, held in dog kennels, really brutalized by the police, shot with rubber bullets, maced while praying, a variety of things that have circulated on social media. At the same time police have attacked, there have been many interesting that happened. A herd of bison that arrived at a strategic moment. The UN has condemned the actions, and on November 3rd, a group of 500 interdenominational clergy from around the country came to denounce the doctrine of discovery and to support the protesters. So there are things happening. We are at a critical juncture. These are some of the images I've collected, and the students are going to show more. There are over, what's the count? 300? I was told over 570 different indigenous groups from all over the world. From New Zealand, Ecuador, Guatemala, Mongolia, all over the world have sent delegations. Here are the entrance of the flags to the first encampment. But this is serious disobedience. It is a highly militarized situation. Drones being shot down, total surveillance, and folks are really putting their lives on the line. And I will end with this very now famous viral image of the hyper-militarized riot police and SWAT teams that have been sent in. So with that, I actually want to pass the floor to the students to talk about their experiences over the summer, and then really open the floor as people have testimony of their own experiences, and then pass the microphone to Jessica Growing Thunder for a really thorough report back of things that are happening on the ground from her trip last week.